I wanted to be an IAS officer and studied very hard for it. And then the day I was going to write, or the day leading up to this exam, my family said I hadn't actually been studying. They thought I was bird watching more than studying, and came up with an advertisement for the Asian College of Journalism and said, you have some blog or something once in a while. That seems like you like writing. So why don't you try and, apply for this? It so happened both the IAS and the ACJ exam was on the same day, and I had to take a call. And I chose to go to journalism school and got recruited into the Hindu, and that's where it all started.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. Keeladi is a very small town, about 12 kilometers from Madurai in Tamil Nadu. But it is one that seems to be having very large-sized answers to some of the most important questions in the history of India. Questions like, was there a second urbanization after the Indus Valley Civilization? What kind of societies took shape in the south of India? What form was it in? What language did they speak? And did they pray to any god at all? My guest today, Sowmiya Ashok, is a journalist and writer based in Chennai. She's currently working on her first non-fiction book on the sensational archaeological dig at Keeladi. She's been a journalist for over a decade, working in national newspapers like The Hindu, The Indian Express, and The Mint. She was the Beijing correspondent for The Indian Express in 2019 and has reported from the US, Kenya, Taiwan, and most recently from Sri Lanka for the print news website. She's currently researching and reporting on the ways in which history, politics, and archaeology combine to shape narratives in modern India. I spoke to Sowmiya about why she feels the Keeladi excavations may alter the world's ideas about the earliest Indians. I spoke to her about some of the myths that this excavation is breaking. Like, for example, maybe large-scale town life was not something that originated in the greater Magadha region, like historians believe. Or like how the evolution of writing was probably not something that originated with Ashoka's edicts. Maybe all of these existed at around the same time or even earlier in present-day Tamil Nadu. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Koffee Podcast. Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. Sowmiya, how are you doing?
Thank you so much for this opportunity and for indulging my current obsessions. I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm extremely glad that we're recording this in a studio. I can't tell you that I remember the last time we recorded an episode in a studio, but this is great. This is wonderful. Even though we passed a couple of war zones getting here.
So many.
Yeah. For the uninitiated, this Chennai is going through its, what do you call this, monsoon preparations?
It's the retrofitting of an urban city for monsoon.
Basically, all the stormwater drainages are being
put in place, really.
Put in place.
I mean, in many places, we don't even have proper stormwater drains. So I guess this is...
Right.
This is when we do it.
Hopefully, we'll finish this before the storm season begins. But are you from Chennai?
Very much.
Yeah.
Grew up in Besant Nagar, just behind Kosi. For those who know Kosi. Yeah, and did all my schooling in Chennai.
Right.
So, and proudly from Chennai.
And you've been a journalist for now how long?
Altogether now, just over a decade. Yeah, so this is kind of entering my 11th year of journalism. And I've spent a lot of that time in newspapers.
Talk to us a little bit about that entire journey.
Sure. It was random. I remember speaking about this to another friend who asked me this question, and the word I used maximum was random. I wanted to be an IAS officer and studied very hard for it. And then the day I was going to write, or the day leading up to this exam, my family said I hadn't actually been studying. They thought I was bird watching more than studying, and came up with an advertisement for the Asian College of Journalism and said, you have some blog or something once in a while. That seems like you like writing. So why don't you try and, apply for this? It so happened both the IAS and the ACJ exam was on the same day, and I had to take a call. And I chose to go to journalism school and got recruited into the Hindu, and that's where it all started. So
now you have to tell us about the blog.
God, it used to be called Moksha Through Food. I can't believe I'm talking about this. Yes, I know. I don't even know what it was, but it was a lot of me exploring.
That sounds like the next level of food coma.
I'm actually embarrassed talking about this. I can't believe this has come out of me. It used to be recipes, I think. But, the great thing is that I deleted all of this. I seem to have gone back at some point to look for it and I couldn't find anything. So it was that plus another one, which was a travel website where I would just write about where I've been. And I'm not even sure more than 4 people read it.
What was that called?
I can't remember. I think maybe Tata Pucci Travels or something ridiculous like
I'm a
that.
huge fan of any travel blog that is not Wanderlist something.
Yeah, so I didn't want it to be a Wanderlist something. Then I thought Tumbleweed, that's the other great one with travel stuff. But this was a Tata Pucci, which was like the floating little cotton seed that moves around. And I thought that kind of captures the travel aspects of things.
That's a beautiful title for a blog.
Yeah. I think 4 people read it in the lifespan. That still exists, by the way, if you go look it up.
Oh,
There's
wow.
some good stuff there.
Excellent. And then Asian School of Journalism happened.
Yeah, so I went to ACJ, Asian College of Journalism, got recruited into the Hindu, where I spent 4 years. Then a summer in the Mint before I went to do my master's at Columbia. Came back and I was with the Indian Express in Delhi for 3.5 years, in which time about a year I spent in China. So quite a lot of back and forth from India and going abroad for various reasons, really.
Tell us about Delhi and China. How was that?
Delhi was great. I spent almost 7 years of my journalistic life there. So I know the city really well. I really enjoyed it. In the first few years before the smog descended on everybody, I really loved it. I loved how cultural it was for a young person living there. It was really vibrant. And I learned so much. It was suddenly going from a small city like Chennai to going to this massive capital city where you find people from everywhere in the country, right? It's not just any one kind of people. There's folks from everywhere and there's things things to do and food. The food was absolutely fantastic. You'd know that, you've lived there. And the 1 year I spent in New York was great as well. I'd spent a lot of my time in that year researching for a piece on race because I wrote a long piece about like a biography of the United States Census. So kind of writing a biography of it, but set in the context of these 2 love stories, which was this old vintage love story of a black man marrying a white woman in the 50s and a more modern American story of a Christian American like marrying a Muslim American. Her background was like Indonesian and so on. So kind of encompassing all these years of how the US Census sort of shifted along over 200 years. Wow. And the reason I got into it is because one day in my dorm room sort of mailbox, there was an experimental US Census form saying, what race are you? And I was like, can I be whatever? Is there not going to be an enumerator coming to check like they do in India? And turns out they were experimenting to see how many people actually subscribe to these little boxes, or are people writing in under the other section saying, actually, I'm a bit of this and I'm a bit of that. And at some point, they were finding that the other category was growing massively. And it was very ironic. I wrote all of this in 2016 because I was super hopeful. But at the end of that year, Donald Trump got elected to the White House. So I packed my bags and came back home. And and the stint in China was wonderful. I learned so much. And it was very interesting to see that our big neighbor in many ways culturally is very much like us. And despite the language problem, which is partly why we don't understand them, and of course many information sort of barriers on both sides to fully immerse into each other's cultures. In terms of Asian people, they have the same set of values about money, about marriage, about love, about where to settle down and how many houses to own and so on. So very, very similar. And I spent most of that year just trying to do random stories, just because I felt Indians didn't know anything about China. So it was a playground of stories, really.
And this was out of Beijing?
Yes, I was based in Beijing for the whole year. 2019, just before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, that's also an interesting time to be in China, isn't it? Wasn't that the time when TikTok was banned? And
I think 2020 is when we saw all of that post the border skirmishes. But yeah, I came back, I think like a week before the world came to know about COVID-19. So it really was timing. I came back and then everything started to get shut. Like everything started to slowly shut down in increments across the world.
This is February?
I came back end of December. So it was a week before we started to know about this virus. And then we went into lockdown like late March, right? So Yeah. The part we don't think about anymore, the trauma that comes with that.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I'm not made peace with the distance in terms of time between us and the pandemic. Sometimes it feels like it was just now.
Yeah, so
Sometimes
true.
it feels like such a long time back. I've not wrapped my head around that yet. Yeah.
I feel the last few years is just a gigantic stretch of time that we're still living that stretch. And that's how I feel. Sometimes I'm like, are we still in 2020? And sometimes I'm like, oh, it's 2 years later.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of us are going through this cognitive dissonance in a way. Yeah.
It's scary. Yeah. So when we spoke, which was a few weeks back, I was, we met at a social gathering, and then I was delighted to know that you've spent a lot of time understanding the Keeladi excavations. But coming back to the story, I was really excited about it because I'm probably an absolute noob when it comes to the specifics of this excavation, except the fact that I hear so many stories around it, so much buzz around it. And all of that is because of the impact of what is happening. And it's been happening for a few years now. And I thought, we can start that section with the opening line of your article on the 52, which I'm a huge fan of. I thought it was a riveting read.
Thank you.
And it starts by you saying that the Keeladi excavations may alter the world's ideas about earliest Indians, right? I thought we could probably start there. How did you start getting interested in that? What was your journey, to that? And then second is, what is the correction that the world will have to make once we're done with this?
My own obsession, as I call it nowadays, because this is all I live and breathe and read about, was I think a newspaper article I read on Keeladi, and it seemed interesting. That's it. I filed it away as something exciting is happening near Madurai. And I don't think I'd even been to Madurai in my life at that stage when I read this piece. And fast forward to 2017, January, if you recall, there was a massive protest that was happening in Marina Beach around the Jallikattu protests. And I was not capable at that time, due to a personal health reason, to go join or be part of it or report on it. I was watching all of this on TV at a friend's house where I was recovering from a surgery. And it just seemed odd. There was something happening in Tamil Nadu and I wasn't fully able to grasp what is going on. And every now and then I'd read snippets, and I moved back to Delhi that year and I forgot all about it. Last 2 years ago, 2020, March or April, the wonderful folks at 52.in, which is this new and exciting online publication that everyone should subscribe to and read, they contacted me and said, look, do you have an idea? Do you want to pitch? We are interested in anything you'd want to write about. And I thought about it and I said, do you think it might be fun to do what's happening with these excavations that I seem to have read a while ago and I've been following on and off, but I don't really know what happened to them. And it seemed like there was a lot of controversy. Maybe we can go back and do a big recap of what happened. So it really started from there, and the editors were kind enough to let me do that because it wasn't a news story anymore in 2020, right? So, of course, the major years in which this was going on was everything from 2015 to 18. Those were the 3-4 years where things were really blowing up. It was in public imagination and consciousness. It was in the papers. But by 2020, things had fizzled out, and there was just a dig quietly happening somewhere, which was disrupted many times by the lockdown, the first and the second lockdown. But archaeologists were at it, and I was curious, let me go see. So it started with a visit to Madurai during off-season in December 2020. I showed up at the site with a wonderful man called Madan, who was assigned the responsibility of showing me around that day because his good friend who had written articles about this was not in town and said, this man will take you around. And Madan sir is a wonderful Madurai-karan, which means he's proudly Madurai, like I am proudly Chennai. And he told me up front, Madurai people are very clear. We either like you or we don't like you. This is how it started, the conversation. And I said, so which bracket am I in? And he said, well, the fact that I'm taking you to the site should suggest that you're a winner in my book. So we started there, and he's now one of my closest friends, so to speak. Like we check in on Keeladi updates very constantly. So he took me to the site. It was all covered up. He told me up front, you won't see anything. It'll just be mounds of mud or things already packed up because the season has ended. It ends every year on September 30th because we're waiting for the monsoons to come. And during the monsoons, you can't dig. It's impossible for trenches to be open and for us to keep these artifacts protected if it's raining. So this is how it started. That's how the year went. And it slowly was me building up into this piece that I ended up writing. But what it said and the process of discovering that was really interesting to me, that what it essentially is showing us when Mr. Amarnath Ramakrishna, who was the superintending archaeologist at the Archaeological Survey of India, when he walked down the Vaigai River, which is the closest river to Madurai and Keeladi, he was just looking to see, is there a place for me to dig? And he kept walking with a bunch of his colleagues who were archaeologists, who were epigraphists, who were research scholars. He walked and checked out 293 sites and narrowed down to 100 sites, and then narrowed that down to one site, which was Keeladi. Wow. And how that process happened was really fascinating. And it also taught me the process of how archaeologists are really just wanderers, right? You're walking with an instinct, you go looking for something. And in this man's gut, I suppose, he said, we haven't seen large-scale excavations happen in Tamil Nadu for a while, so let me go try and find if there's something to look for. And I believe this is a tradition with archaeologists that they choose to go to their home states. If you look up excavations, it's something you understand, right? You speak the language, you understand the culture, and it largely has become sort of a lovely tradition where if I am the SA for that region, let me go see if my state has something. And the person who...
What is an SA?
Sorry, superintending archaeologist. I'm just going to have to constantly remember that I'm in a different...
Don't worry, I'm on it.
Yeah, so he walks around with his team, finds the site, and the way they found the site was very random. They were in a small tea shop drinking tea when they were talking to an old history teacher there who spent a lot of his time teaching history in the local school in Keeladi, who had back in the day, in the late 70s, found some coins. He had found some terracotta figurines and so on. And they said, sir, do you remember where you saw that site? Like, can you take us back? And he said, look, I'm retired and old and stop bothering me. I don't know. And in all of this time, there was a man sitting in the next table who was overhearing all of this, who happened to be transporting coconuts from this grove to the local market, who said, sir, I have seen these broken potsherds in this grove, so let me lead you to that.
Wow.
They show up to find an exposed early historic brick structure because if you go to that village today and if you walk around that space, there are a ton of brick kilns around. And so often they're digging mud to use in those brick factories.
Right.
And one of these big earth mover JCB machines had just dug up this sort of ground at this point. And what Amarnath sir found at that stage was this early historic brick structure just sitting there. And he thought, this is interesting. And one of the big clues here is when you have some kind of a structure, you'd see that the ground itself is a little swollen. You'd see that the whole earth looks like it's a bit of a lump. It's come up a bit. It's raised like a little cake. And that's exactly what they found. They were like, wait, this is a mound. And this is a 110-acre mound. So let's start digging. And so they just chanced upon this place. They started digging. And in that first season, I think they found like 5,000 artifacts. Various things came out of the ground. And in the second season is when they found these super impressive brick structures, which had large sort of water channels. It had clear ideas of perhaps this was somewhere where they made textiles, perhaps. Was it an industrial structure? Was it a habitation structure? It was still too early to know that. But at that stage, you had just not seen this impressive stretch of brick structures in Tamil Nadu before. You'd seen it before in other sites, but the scale of it was really stunning. And so the reason when we say, does it challenge the idea of early Indians, you go back to think about what did you study in school? Where did you study were the first urbanizations that happened after the Indus site, after the Harappan site, sort of Harappan civilization tapered off? All we hear about is the Gangetic Plains.
Yeah.
We know that something happened around the Gangetic Plains. We know that Mahajanapadas, the big sort of city structures there, you've seen pictures of these brick structures, but you've never seen that anywhere in the south or anywhere in Tamil Nadu specifically. So the big challenge here for archaeologists was, hold on, if we date this and we find a corresponding site, could we prove that urbanization happened at the same time as the Gangetic Plains? So it may not be a replacing, or you cannot say one is earlier than the other yet, but you can definitely say that, hey, hold on, there were people who lived here too. So I think the possibility of a different kind of history was what we're excited about, saying, does this site then tell us there's more to this going forward? As they dig more, are we going to find more? And the second big reveal for them was potsherds. Now, they found, I don't know, massive amounts of potsherds, like tiny little scrapes of terracotta pots with names inscribed on it. And it was written in Tamil Brahmi. And these names sort of showed a certain sense of ownership of these pots, which was really interesting to archaeologists, because clearly you have purchased a pot and then you've written your name on it to say, this is mine, which is a similar tradition we still see with our stainless steel like vessels at home, right? We put our names on it, many of us, in many families. And so one of the things, like the modern equivalent to that, is how they always explain it to me, saying, in your house also you'll have little initials on your vessels. This might have been similar to that. But it showed that, were there a group of people here who were literate? Did they all know how to write? Which means it's not just literacy confined to the elite or to the ruler, which, if you look at the Ashokan edicts, that sort of tells you that Ashoka knew how to write, or his was the first time we as Indians learned to write. Here it was very immediately revealed to me when I went and started speaking to people was, see, look, this shows that we also knew how to write around that time. And it wasn't just confined to an elite group of people. It was a larger commoners. Commoners knew how to write. So does this reveal a more sort of intellectual community? What do we know about them? And so on and so forth. So this is really, I think the big reveal here was, is there an alternative history that we just didn't know about? But the bigger question here for me, which was interesting, is why do we obsess so much about brick structures, right? Why is brick structures a example of urbanization? Why can't it be other kinds of intellectual sort of, I guess, expressions? So with these potsherds writing, they've also found it in other sites in Tamil Nadu, which were dug much earlier. And often people say, why do we obsess about this? Perhaps our way of weather structures, our climate here just didn't, need brick structures. Perhaps we built with wood. Perhaps we built with other perishable things that sort of tapered off through the course of history. So that was interesting to me to see. Some people thought this was super fascinating. Some were skeptical, to be like, not really, we have more work to do. But essentially, we're still at a phase where we don't know too much.
Right. It's amazing, right? Like in 2022, 2020, 2018, 2022, we're still discovering a big part of the history of this country, like at least half of this country, which is stunning. But so many questions from what you just said. Before I go into that, I have one very curious OCD sort of a question. How does an archaeological site look like when it is off-season or on-season? How does it look like?
Sure. So on-season is, of course, you would choose a place. So when an archaeologist shows up to a place like they did in Keeladi, the first thing they do is they'll do a test trench just to see, if we dig mostly it'll be right in the middle of the mount. They'll say, let's dig here to see if we find something and see if there's potential for the site. So it's not always the case that you'll find something. Okay. I recently went to a site which is being dug close to Chennai near Oragadam. And they told me they just walked around the space and they found early historic brick structures being exposed. And they thought, oh, this is interesting. Maybe we'll find something. And in some of those trenches they did, and in some they didn't. But the way you dig is based on rules laid down by a British man called Mortimer Wheeler. And that sort of dictates how you dig a trench. I leave it at that because I'm not an archaeologist, so I can't tell you more scientific ways on how they dig. But essentially, he's put down rules as to how and where you dig, whether it's a horizontal excavation in the sense that do you go horizontally across and cover more base, or do you go vertical and go all the way down, which you'll end up doing through the quadrants anyway till you hit the natural soil. So the idea is when you have a quadrant within a trench, so a trench generally has 4 quadrants, each one will show you all of the layers that it has. So what is interesting is as you go further down into a quadrant and you hit natural soil, you can clearly see the stratification on the side. Can you clearly see an early historic marker? Do you see an Iron Age marker? Are you discovering iron implements, or are you discovering little stone tools, which takes the site much earlier to the Paleolithic times? So the way Wheeler has mapped this is how archaeology in India is practiced, irrespective of whether you're a central government archaeologist or a state government archaeologist. We in Tamil Nadu also dig using the Wheeler method. So as a visual, when you go away from all of the ways in which Wheeler thought of trench as a scientific model and whatever, if you're just watching this, it's a wonderful, large site with a lot of laborers, scrunched up over a little place, brushing all the mud, taking the mud, putting it out. And as the quadrant grows more and more deeper,
right,
and you have the supervisors and the archaeologists walking around and looking around to see is there something interesting. People are gathering all the artifacts, putting it together, labeling it, putting it on one side. Then you have the pottery yard on one side where every trench, all the pottery that comes out goes and gets labeled and put in a pottery yard where they know exactly which trench threw up which potsherd. And so this is how it looks. It's this sort of busy environment, mostly exposed to the elements. And it's a combination of archaeologists and village folks nearby who get employed to work on the site. Now, off-season, you won't see any of this. So when I first went to Keeladi, I saw none of this. The beauty of Keeladi is it is under a wonderful coconut grove. So I had the quiet of a coconut grove and the swaying, beautiful coconut trees up to the blue skies, but I didn't see anything. So it was kind of a letdown because I was expecting to see this gigantic township, but I saw nothing. But one archaeologist, I think, had just left their tent behind. So it was very cool, and I took a picture of that saying, this is how it looks. This was my first introduction to a site. Most of the ones in Tamil Nadu now, if you're going to go after this, if you feel enthusiastic enough to drive over, right now you won't see anything because we're in off-season. So this is how it looks.
It's beautiful. And for some strange reason, it reminds me of the opening scene of Hey Ram, where I always wondered why there was a character called Mr. Wheeler.
Yeah.
And
I have to confess, I haven't watched that film yet. Although everyone who knows I'm working on this book are like, have you watched Hey Ram? So it's on my to-watch list.
Right. So in terms of what you said, in fact, I have another tactical question there. So you mentioned the word seasons. And somewhere in your article, I also read that there were 6 or 7 seasons of excavation in this site. And the 5th season probably revealed a lot more. Sounds like I'm talking about Netflix, right? What happens between seasons? You're starting to dig and then you leave it up to the elements? What if there is a huge storm and water gushes in?
Oh, not at all. When you start the dig, which is largely I'm only looking at Tamil Nadu for now. Of course, the season timings change based on which geographical part of the country you are in, entirely dependent on the monsoons. You cannot afford to leave your sites exposed to the rain because a lot of it will get washed away. This is essentially like mud, right? You're like thick mud which you've cut into little squares.
Right.
So if the water comes in, you're pretty much looking at slush. So you can't afford to at all leave it unattended during the monsoon. So in every part of the country, it depends on the season for the monsoon. So in Tamil Nadu, you'll start digging around February and you'll go till September. And in September, the last few weeks is just packing it up again. So you'll put the mud back. You either, if you're done with the dig, then you put the mud back, pack it up nicely, give it back to the landowner if you've taken it on lease. You don't always own this land as a government, right? It could be somebody's private property. In Keeladi, it's largely tenantope or like coconut groves that belong to people. So you kind of lease it, and one of the ways you bring them into the project is they work on their own land through that. As a laborer or as a supervisor or as a person who cuts the section. Section is when they cut the wonderful sides of the quadrant and it looks perfectly symmetric, right? And some of these men and women are extremely experienced. You can identify that they're one of the best when it comes to this kind of work. So if you're returning the land because you're done with the excavation, you pack it up fully with mud and return it. If not, at times they'll put like a tarp sort of thing, pack it up with mud again, and just keep it for when they come back the next year, if they were planning to do that again.
Got it.
So for the most part, you return the land like you found it, ideally. So today, if you go to Keeladi, the brick structures you can't find them. They're under the coconut grove again. And there is some plans to maybe purchase that land and actually expose it as a as a larger museum, a live museum where you can wander around.
Right.
So the state government currently has done a certain small section where you can still see the brick structures, but the ones that were initially exposed by the Archaeological Survey of India is all back under the ground, under the coconut groves. So it's a real mix now based on where you go and which site you're looking at.
That's fascinating, right? Like, so the idea is not to take it out and then show it to the world. It's just to learn and then put it where it was.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what I've learned about, because I realized I was taken to Keeladi because of the hype.
Right.
The media hype is what got me, like everybody else, right? Till that, I never even looked at an archaeological site. Like, why was this so fascinating? Because it caught my attention. We were living in a world where everyone has a phone camera. So people were rushing to this place as soon as they discovered the site. People were like, oh my God, this is right near Madurai. I should go right away. And till today, that hype continues. If you go to Keeladi during season, even today, you'll find some new visitor. Like, I've been there so many times now. Last time, a group from the Tamil Sangam of Dubai flew down to see the site.
Right.
So there's an enthusiasm of this site because of the hype that it created. But for the most part, archaeologists do work very, very quietly. They dig, they record, document everything, they photograph in situ. Like, if you found some potsherd there or a pot sticking out of the quadrant, you'll take a picture of it. All of that is documented splendidly. The site is closed. You go back to your head office and you write a report. It's a very mundane record keeping. And that depends on who you work for, whether state or center has different rules on what kind of the shape that report takes, where do the artifacts end up, and so on. But it's a very quiet process to try and understand who lived in these parts.
Right.
The simple question of who are these people? Where did they come from? Who lived in these parts? How did they live? Did they eat food? Did they leave behind any kind of beads? Did they leave behind toys? All of this we found in Keeladi. We found people having played with different kinds of hopscotches. We found folks, wearing nice, wonderful beads, which they supposedly made into, necklaces and bangles. You found conch shell bangles. You even found this carnelian imbroglio. I'm not saying that correctly, but it's kind of like a sweet seal, like an orange color seal made of the carnelian stone. And it has a boar etched onto it. And we don't get that particular carnelian here in Tamil Nadu, which means it's a sign of a trade with Gujarat.
Right.
And the theory is perhaps it traveled to Rome, it got converted into this sort of boar-like seal, and then it came back to us. So it could have been anything. Like, we really don't know. So we have all of these artifacts that's coming out of the ground. And the objective is for the archaeologists to sit and say, what could this have been? And it's an interpretation at that stage.
Right. You spoke about the people of the place, right? And is it safe to say that it was a fairly lavish lifestyle? There were people who were well-to-do. I'm just choosing my words carefully. People who were sort of wealthy, they were able to spend time and resources on art and games and stuff like that. Is that the sense you get?
It's really hard to be exactly sure. We found this even in the Indus Valley sites, right? Like, from what I've read of those sites, there seems to have been some sophistication in the way they thought, just in the way they built their homes. I remember reading a specific description about, I think it was Dholavira or somewhere, where it was even a beautifully constructed shower where someone is standing on a sort of floor above and pouring water through this like sieve like thing, so the person below has a shower like situation going.
Wow.
And so there was clearly some thought that went into the way they built and the way they lived. In Keeladi, it's definitely hard to say whether they were lavish. I think having toys and jewelry is often seen as an indication that society is comfortable enough that you can now indulge in some kind of pastimes or sport. So that was one interpretation the archaeologists made, that the fact that we see such ornate sort of beads or we see such beautiful hopscotches could be an indication that these were artists of some sort, or they thought of art in a different way.
Right.
But what we have side by side to all of this is the Sangam texts and the literature from that time. And I think one of the big wins for what we've understood to be the Sangam literature is that we never had material evidence to say, all of the stuff that these poems are talking about, do we actually see that in real life? And Mr. Annamalai, who is the former Hindu journalist in Madurai, who has written some of the most authoritative pieces on Keeladi, he spoke to me for my piece to say, is this then an indication that we've seen like this lavish life that these people lived? Like, finally we're seeing what the poems are telling us, or the literature is telling us, that we're seeing that they lived this way. But I still think it's too soon to know fully how their lives were. We've only been digging there. This is the 8th season, compared to something like Harappa, where we've been digging for nearly like more than 50 years or even 100 years in some places, right? So I think there's a long way to go to fully know who they were. But it sounds like there was definitely some scope for fun activities or artistic expressions.
Right, yeah. I was talking to you about how they were lavish or not. The other thing that sort of came out in that article in 52 was also the fact that, and I don't know if this has changed since, because I realized that article itself was some time back, right? That there were not any particular places or objects of worship that were really excavated from. What does that really tell us about them? Is this still the case?
So that's definitely a contentious sort of segue, I guess, into the topic, because I wrote this in April 2021. So not too long back, but still there's been a whole year and a half of excavation since. The site continues to be dug up, and there's lots of new artifacts that have come up. I think what that was specific to was how we think of history nowadays in India, right? We tend to frame it in these binaries of this Aryan-Dravidian debate. And I think that's where that piece of information was really important for people to highlight, because they were making a political point through it. The reason for that, and I want to be really careful while saying this, because everyone feels so much ownership of history and where they come from and their lands, and so get really passionate about it. But very honestly, they've not found anything to suggest that this could be linked, I guess, to a Vedic site in the way that we know it in the northwestern parts of this country. And that is what they were. When I say they, I feel it's an interpretation that people have made as well, apart from what the archaeologists have said. Now, archaeologists have said these are artifacts that we have found. They have not said beyond that. But in an environment where you can write and interpret, over the years, all of the work that has come out surrounding Keeladi has also said, hey, this could be what we've always been saying, which is perhaps, there's a link between the Dravidians and the Harappan people. See, there's no Vedic symbols involved. And so in my piece, I tried very hard to not get into this, I guess, in a way, a regressive, a very simple debate, which I wanted it to be much larger point here.
Fairly reductive, isn't it?
Exactly. That was the word I was going for. And I've forgotten. It definitely is reductive. And I felt at the end of the day, what is fascinating to me is this tells us something about our country as a large. Tells us about migrants that came from, and I'm a big believer, everyone did come from Africa, there's no dispute. But it's about when we came and those different waves and so on and so forth. But where they settled and who they were and what were those patterns. So for me, that was fascinating. And I felt I mentioned this, I think, in the piece I write about how, especially during elections, who lived here question gets co-opted into these big labels. And the point about not finding any of that is a very clear statement made by people who feel very strongly about this argument that the Dravidians and the Harappans were linked in some way. And so that's what that reference was.
Right. And in a way, as you were answering the previous question, I was just thinking, I was linking it back to the conversation we were having about Delhi. Right? Delhi is a great example of, I don't know if there's anyone who is quintessentially from Delhi, because there have been so many civilizations on and on. Everyone in Delhi is from somewhere nearby and not exactly from Delhi, right? And this entire debate of who came where and who came first it's amazing how much it decides our present as well, isn't it? Especially if you go down to Sri Lanka and what's happening there. And the lack of any strong argument on either side saying Tamilians were there before, or these were the indigenous pieces. That sort of leads to much of what's happening right now, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it's fair that people feel so passionate about their land, right? I think it's really wonderful. So I feel all of my work around this has also been trying to document what comes out of that earth. So I'm trying to steer clear of the narrative building around this. And I'm trying very hard, at least in my research or my book currently, to stay grounded on the earth. What is the earth telling me? What kind of stuff is coming out of the earth? Let's not get caught up as to who came when. A big part of this is, of course, science, because what we are seeing today in Tamil Nadu, and which is a wonderful thing, is relying so much on scientific evidence. So we are not just not making claims constantly. We are saying we are sending samples to get tested, and they come back with a certain date because it's radiocarbon dating. Or we are collecting DNA samples from some of these burial sites that they found near Keeladi. And when you test those samples, can you find something that will explain a piece of the larger puzzle that we are trying to solve, right? Those are still, at least with the DNA samples, that question is still out in the open. We don't know yet. The work is going on. I think COVID delayed that process of figuring out. But who we are and where we came from question is like everyone is interested in knowing. And it's become in 2022 India a very political question. And I think it's completely fair people feel that passionate. But what is exciting to me about a site like Keeladi is it perhaps takes us to a phase something like 2300 to 2600 years ago where maybe we didn't see these kinds of divisions like we see today. That is an exciting thought experiment, right? Of like, how did that society look? But when we're interpreting in today's India about something in the past, we obviously cannot be devoid of all of those labels and identities we bring. So you're absolutely right. I always felt that about Delhi, that who did live here, right? And does it matter? Because it's come out to be a wonderful amalgamation of cultures. But it's also indisputable right now in India that we are trying, there is a certain political force making it more homogeneous. And I think this is one way of fighting back. The fact that who the Keeladi people were question could be seen as one way to say, actually, we came at this time. And it's important for people to have that kind of reference points, I feel.
Yeah. Talking about debates, the other thing a lot of people like me are fairly unsure of, mostly also because we are fairly ignorant, is in terms of the Sanskrit and Tamil journeys in this country. And did they coexist around the same time? Did one come before the other? So on and so forth. Do these excavations shed any new light on this in terms of on the age of the language itself?
Definitely. I think one of the exciting things about Keeladi was that they found these potsherds which pushed back the date of maybe when the Tamil Brahmi script came about. That was written in the excavation report for Keeladi, which is a small booklet that you can find anywhere now. If you're a Keeladi enthusiast, you can pick it up. Also, I think there's a Madurai book fair going on right now, and you'll find a whole Keeladi stall there where you can pick up a brochure on all of the current excavations.
No, I was really excited about this one because, growing up in Chennai, I was stunned when I got to know that Tolkappiyam, which is, a book of grammar, really existed, more than 1600 years back. And the possibility that the language was flourishing, 1500 years before that seems very, very exciting, right? But what I'm taking away from what you're saying is that it is not really clear, but it is quite possible that what we know is the origin of the language, Tamil, could probably be much more dated than we think. That possibility exists. Is that fair
Absolutely,
to say?
yes.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, how exciting it is to know that this could be the case, right? I spent last weekend talking to someone who does a podcast on Sangam poetry. So she takes one poem every day, she reads it out and she translates it into English. I can send you the link and you can link it to one of it's called Sangam poetry.
Okay.
Simple as that, I think. Let me
No,
get
we will
back
definitely
to you.
link it in the show
We
notes.
can link it. Yeah. This was a off-syllabus question you have just asked me. But it was really nice to hear how those poems get selected to be showcased on this podcast and also the range of it. So we've really written wonderful literature and it would be so exciting to know where it all started.
Yeah. And one of the things, again, I go back to the article that I remember distinctly is you saying that, till now we only had like poetic and literature evidences of that era, nothing material, so to say, right? The thing I also want to talk to you about is, and you sort of mentioned it, in previous answers that there was a lot of communication between the Indus Valley Civilization and this, and for that matter, many other civilizations of that time as well. But particularly, was there enough signs to say that there was trade or communication or people traveling between here and Harappa and Mohenjo-daro?
Not specifically Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, but I guess we don't have anything written down specifically to suggest this, right? But there are two parts to this. One is you definitely see examples of a vibrant trade at that time, whether that is to do with other parts of India as we know it today, or whether it is to do with Rome. There's so many examples in Tamil archaeology today where you'll find wonderful examples of trade between Tamil lands and Rome. There's even literary references. If you go to the Pondicherry Museum, you'll find amphoras, which is a specific kind of pottery where they used to bring wine. And you'll find broken parts of that in a very sad looking display box. We should all, in fact, everyone should go to the Pondi Museum and have a look. And next to that is a site called Arikamedu, which was an old port city. And between Pondicherry and Chennai, there's an Alamparai fort where they used to export things as well. So we've had a vibrant sort of trade. There's no question that Tamil people back in the day were doing all kinds of wonderful things by trading across the world, specifically to Rome. And even the Korke pearl is seen as something that Roman women really loved and asked for, to the extent that there's actually an entry in those. I remember reading it for this piece about how there was sort of an appeal in Rome to say, please stop buying these pearls because we're spending so much money on it and we don't have money for other things. So I even tweeted that certain reference because someone had done a PhD where they found this particular paragraph. And it wasn't just Tamil Nadu in the way that the boundaries we know it, right? This was much larger. We even have Kerala involved. The Muziris port, you had the Korke port, Keeladi was also on the waterway. So you really have seen where is all this going, and the fact that you're finding all these artifacts that have a distinct sort of, this has come from some other part of the world or the country. And that is one, but with connections to Harappa and Mohenjo-daro or the old Indus Valley sites, I think graffiti marks is one big giveaway. So we do find in many of the potsherds coming out of Keeladi is a certain kind of graffiti that we also see in the IVC.
Wow.
And so one of the big projects that's happening right now is in this wonderful place called Roja Muttaya Library in Taramani, where they have something called the Indus Study Center, where they are going to sit and document exactly this to try and understand, can we see these connections? So definite signs of perhaps there were similar people who lived here. And also one of the other signs is the way they built. So in the early visuals of Keeladi, when the ground was opened up and the structures were revealed, one of the easy interpretations at that point was, this looks like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro. We don't know that for sure, but immediate visual looks like what we may have seen of YouTube videos of these. We would never actually gone there yet. But so there's similarities. And I mentioned Nayanjot Lahiri, the eminent historian in my piece, who says, we are looking at migration that happened to several parts of this country. I don't know why when we think of India, we think Indus Valley ended and then a few years later something else started. I don't think we see it as maybe that group of people moved due to various reasons, which is largely comes down to climate as well. I mean, there are papers out there suggesting that one of the reasons for the Harappan civilization's demise was climate change or some movement around, drought or floods. I mean, it depends on where they were. And so they could have moved and maybe they moved with their sort of cultural underpinnings in some way or their material stuff, right? So you can definitely see, I mean, I've mentioned this in the piece about graffiti symbols, planning of their cities, but it's too soon because I still think hardly maybe 10-20% of that mound has been excavated in Keeladi. We have a long way to go. Imagine a 110-acre mound. We still haven't dug all of it up. So it'll take time to try and fully understand if we can see more connections.
Right. But it's safe to say probably in 5 to 10 years from now, history books will be very different.
Oh, definitely. I think it's already entering history books in Tamil Nadu.
Right.
You'll find a chapter on Keeladi. And not just Keeladi. What Keeladi did for Tamil Nadu, which I find super exciting, is that it led to so many more excavations. And that's the reason why I thought it'll be useful to document all of this in a book. because it's not just about that one site anymore. That site captured public imagination like nothing else had ever in modern India for Tamils, even if you say. But in general, it's an exciting excavation. But it seeped into so many different facets. So it's gone into school curriculum. There's a diploma course in archaeology that the State Department offers. It has led to multiple other excavations. So today, if you go to Mailadambare, which is in the Krishnagiri district, you'll find active excavations going on there. Next to that is Perambalur. They found iron implements in Mailadambare, which they dated and found to be 4,200 years old.
Wow.
Then down closer to Thoothukudi district, you'll found this place called Shivagalai, which is a burial site. Inside there, an Iron Age burial site. There was an urn inside which there's a rice husk that they sent to Florida Beta Analytics Lab for carbon dating with the samples, and that came out to be 3,200 years old. So you're discovering things that you didn't know about this region before, right?
Right.
So it has led to an insane number of new sites, an insane interest in archaeology. And a lot of this is led by young men and women of the state who are modern Tamils trying to understand ancient Tamils. Like, who are these people? And so they've really fanned out across the state, not just the state. The chief minister announced plans to send people to map out connections with, say, Oman, or like ways in which we may have traded in the Middle East and Rome and so on. Also, this side, the more modern medieval aspects of it was through, where did the Cholas go in terms of their maritime conquest. So it's led to both an old and a new understanding. And I think they're very clear to say we are trying to map the whole trajectory. We have Attirampakam site near Chennai, which is a middle Paleolithic site where they found a lot of stone tools and so on from many years ago, 1.5 million years ago, really. So they keep that as a reference point and they're building it till today. Like all the things that we know about how we developed in these parts. And one of the biggest examples of, what we think of is this wonderful intellectual space has always been Madurai. We always think of Madurai as the seat of literature. It's also got wonderful temples and so on. But at a basic level, we could never dig in Madurai because Madurai is continuously inhabited. How will you move people out of the city to dig under it? So to an extent, Keeladi became a big deal and was so important to our understanding is because it's only 12 kilometers away. So it's a nice proxy for Madurai to say perhaps people lived in these parts, right? The same people who lived in this city. So this has gone into all kinds of little details. People apparently are naming their children based on some of the names that is written on these potsherds. Like that's a little discovery I made recently. So it's a very passionate thing, and I've watched people at these Keeladi's, exhibits at these book fairs coming in large numbers, taking pictures with these model trenches, taking selfies with all of these artifacts. Like it's really a celebration of who we are, right? It's become one of those proud moments in Tamil Nadu.
That's the most beautiful part of this, isn't it? Yeah. I was going to crack a very bad joke on how we should do more stormwater drains in Madurai so that we can...
It's already happening, I think, because of the Smart City program. I was thinking that about this wonderful construction work that I'm having to deal with behind my house now, where a whole building is being raised to the ground.
Right.
And I'm seeing a modern excavation. I'm literally seeing like floor by floor going. And I thought, this is how they break down a whole building. And if somebody in the future comes to look for clues, perhaps there was an old structure here made of cement and nothing more.
Maybe we should all think about what clues we will leave for the archaeologists of the future. I hope, as you were talking, two things came to my mind. One, of course, is that clearly your own archaeology quotient has skyrocketed in these last 4-5 years. Because for a journalist, you speak about it in very, very technical language. And the other thing is also, I don't know if archaeology is a high-paying profession, but if there is so much to learn from this, lots of sons and daughters should be aspiring to become archaeologists, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And no, I disagree with you that my knowledge has improved. I actually mostly feel like a dud when I'm in the field. I think what really helped me is I'm really good at getting you to trust me enough to tell me your story. So a lot of people have spoken to me about their work. So I have a lot of anecdotes from archaeologists on how they do their job. So for the last year and a half, I've spent so much time trying to understand how they do their job when I'm watching them do it, annoyingly watching them do it. Most of the time, they're like, you're back again asking questions. I had only an anecdotal or like an observational or sort of an ethnographic sort of field note sort of knowledge of archaeology. But recently, I read a book called Bureaucratic Archeology, which wonderfully summed up all of that I had tried to observe on the field by myself and put it in the context of academic frameworks. So that was somebody's thesis, PhD thesis that they made into a book. I think it's a Cambridge University, publication. And it is for me, one of the best books I've read in a long time. And every page is like nerdily underlined to the extent that I don't really see why I even bothered to underline because the whole book is relevant. So all of these words I'm using now, and I hope it's not too technical, but it's me still trying to figure out if I'm, on the right track. So that's one. With the second one, absolutely. I think many young women are also joining archaeology courses. In my wandering around the state recently to try and look at other sites, I've come across a lot of young women very eager to learn and very smart and critical in their understanding, not getting swayed by any of what they're finding. Very measured in this is what is coming. This next needs to be documented. We need to then match it to what we already know, try and understand a larger question here. Right. So it's done in a very systematic academic way. And parents are also encouraging children to join. And I think the diploma course that the State Archaeology Department runs is very famous now. More people are joining. So it's become actually quite a fun, lucrative, seen as a good job.
Nice. I'm particularly heartened by the fact that more women are becoming archaeologists. That suddenly gives me a lot of confidence that things will be correct and
Definitely.
proper.
I actually considered joining the diploma course, but then I don't know whether you get paid well. And I feel like there won't be much of a difference from the journalistic life that I lead. I feel both industries might pay similarly.
Right. Before we close, two things which are related to what you were talking about. You spoke about Harappan, Mohenjo-daro a lot, though it's not directly related. Did we sort of lose that momentum in that post-partition because a large parts of this was outside India overall? Did the excavation suffer because of the partition?
Oh, I would know pretty much nothing about the way the excavations were done in Pakistan or they continue to do. Recently, I happened to read about it again because of the floods in the Sindh province, which affected Mohenjo-daro site quite badly. It was pretty badly flooded in the recent sort of Pakistani floods. And what I do know is that we went into a certain insecurity post-partition, that we lost our heritage. It got divided up and was sent to the other side of the border. I don't think we lost momentum in India. We dug all over the north and the northwest. We found wonderful sites. So I think what happened post-partition is we were feeling a sense of, like a void that we'd lost these big Harappan sites. Both Harappan and Mohenjo-daro went to Pakistan post-partition, and it was now a situation where we had to find our heritage. Perhaps this was in other parts of the country as well, and we had to go look for it. So the way that happened was excavations, large-scale excavations that happened along river valleys, because often people settle along river valleys in the way that you build towns and cities and even for agricultural purposes. So it didn't sort of stop our pursuit in finding our heritage, so to speak. So we've got these huge sites in Gujarat, Rajasthan, Haryana, which even today are wonderful and impressive and huge sort of, I guess, like an example of who are these people, in those parts, right? And one of those sites is Dholavira, which sadly I haven't been to yet. I've read so much about it that I'm supremely impressed by it long distance, but haven't actually seen it. But what I think happened in that was the geographical location sort of remained in the north and the northwest or the central part of India. We didn't go beyond that. And I think that's what was fascinating about Keeladi, because it was a large-scale excavation. It's not just one season. It's now gone for 8 full seasons, right? So that is classified as one of the markers of a large-scale excavation where you found a potential site and you look for clues, and if as it throws up more and more, you keep expanding it in the next season. So when one season shows you a certain brick structure, the next season you pick it up where you left off, which is, okay, this looked like perhaps this wall was going this way. Let me dig there, and there. So that's how it's done. And I think that we hadn't seen in a long time in the South. And one of the, thoughts that Mr. Amarnath Ramakrishna had was exactly that, saying we had not seen these large-scale excavations in the South, so let's look for it. So it's not like we stopped digging. We very much dug, but we dug in a specific part of the country. So it still leaves you with so much more. It leaves you with sites in the east, in the northeast, in the up north, in Kashmir, or much lower down where we are in terms of the 5 southern states. So there's lots more to do is the point.
You mentioned Mr. Ramakrishna, Amarnath Ramakrishna, and in a way you sort of started talking about this at the beginning of the episode by how he narrowed it down from some 250, 300 to about 100 or so and then chose this place. So I'm assuming a lot of this also intuition, and in this case, Mr. Ramakrishna's intuition. In a way, is he the central character of the archaeological story here?
Definitely. I mean, it was his project to dig along the Vaigai River Valley. So definitely his thought that led to this. And Saturn mapped down every district through which the Vaigai River flows through, and walked the whole stretch. It wasn't just confined to 1 or 2 districts of Tamil Nadu. They walked the entire stretch of everywhere the river went. And definite intuition, but like I mentioned before, I think it had a lot to do with Madurai. It's a lot to do with the fact that this was such a vibrant city, and it really is. I don't know if you've been or you frequent Madurai often, but you'll know how crazily vibrant that place is, right? If everything shuts down at 9:15 in Chennai, in Madurai, one auto guy will tell you at 3 in the morning, you'll get biryani, you come with me. I'll show you a nice...
I found Madurai to be an extraordinarily connected city. Like, for example, they have these 2 big festivals, right? One is the wedding of Meenakshi, who's the primary idol of the big temple there. And then the other is that Aragar Aathaleranga, the sort of a thing. I don't know what the significance of that is, sadly. But, during these festivals, I've seen like from the smallest of shops to the biggest of organizations, everyone is in that vibe and everyone is talking about it. It's almost like a, like one colony which just became this big city.
That's exactly how someone from there described it to me. They said, this is a big village. It's just become a village that is still not fully a city. Like we're still at the village level where that's why you see so much vibrancy at night even. I was amazed every time I go there, and I'm used to coming from Chennai where I swear to God everybody sleeps at 9:16. If you go out anytime, everything is quiet. In Madurai, people will be chatting at that time or later, or you're just sitting and talking about things, and it's always interesting and something is happening. And I think there's a certain culture and like heritage to Madurai that was never fully explored through archaeology. And I think one of the primary reasons to choose Keeladi was, I said, the proximity to Madurai. It really became quite an interesting sort of reason for them to pick it, because they found 3 separate sites and they finally found Keeladi because it had the most potential. So it's not like they didn't try and dig in other places. They did. So it's a test site that they do, right? The test trench, which will give you a gut feeling. If your gut feeling leads you to that, then the test trench will give you the material evidence. So I think that's how it progressed. But definitely Mr. Ramakrishnan is the big dude here who found this place.
But the big dude had to be transferred.
Yeah, he wanted to keep digging, but I believe there was a policy, which is what the central government says, was after a 2-year, a long dig, everyone will have to get transferred, because what was happening is people were continuously digging in one place but not writing the excavation reports. So there was a certain policy that came in around 2015-16. This is what was publicly told at that point, that forced almost everybody who'd finished a 2-year assignment to move to a new place. So a lot of this particular site had a lot of controversy because it was seen as a deliberate attempt by the central government to come and shut down what is essentially a Tamil civilization. And there's a lot of chatter on that. There was at that point, there was a lot of politics around, how can you shift the artifacts from Tamil Nadu and take it to Karnataka, where the ASI's office was. And finally, if you read my piece, it gives you that real day in Keeladi when these 2 big central government ministers showed up to hold a press conference, and they said, we transferred him, but we've got another person come in and he'll take over. But he subsequently said there was nothing new that he found, so he shut it down. So it really had become this big story of one narrative coming and pushing out the other narrative, really. And there's a lot more to that, which I won't reveal. It's all secret till 2024 when you read my book.
Yes, I was just going to come to that.
But yeah, so I'll tell you more. Or you read more.
That was the segue I was going to take anyway. While the article itself, and of course you've written a lot about this, extraordinarily exhaustive, right? Took me a few days to completely finish reading and appreciate everything in there.
It's only a 25-minute read.
That's what you guys say. But you don't account for the other Google searches I have to make on the side. Now you're writing a book on the subject. And how's that going?
I don't sleep very much these days. It's anxiety-inducing. It's going well. I think it's going slowly. And it's my first nonfiction book, so a first ever book. So it has its own challenges. And I'm in the process of making the story much larger than just this one site. So it's also challenges that come with a larger canvas. So I'm bringing you to different sites in India. So it's hopefully going to answer many questions you have. And hopefully it won't be technical. And it hopefully won't make you Google too much. But we'll see. I'm still in the very nascent first few months of having received a book contract and just starting my sort of foundation on it. So,
How do you sum up? How you obviously spent many years thinking and writing about this subject. How do you sum up your feelings right now? Hopeful, scared, worried, excited?
Oh, all of those things. I'm definitely excited. I feel like not everyone has the opportunity to write a book. I'm very, very, very grateful and fortunate for this. And the reason I'm saying that is because I also think I read this on Twitter recently. There's only a certain kind of fool who will opt to write a book. And I really feel that's me right now. I'm really excited about answering a lot of these questions for myself. So primarily, I'm excited because I get to just go on this journey of discovery. And in the process, hopefully, you will be entertained through the storytelling. I want to just write a solid story which will keep you entertained for the whole time, and where you really go away thinking, oh, there are all these other questions that I have, and I now have new questions, or some of those questions I did have are answered by this. So that's the quest, that answering my own questions and hopefully some of yours.
That's brilliant. I can't remember the last time I heard someone say that you're going to write about archaeology but you're going to make it a very, very entertaining.
This is all a hope. So again, from the excitement is a hope. And then there are days where I'm like, this is like a really bad idea. Let's not do this at all. I hope my publisher is not listening. But
we are
so it's a
waiting.
lot.
We're waiting with bated breath for that one. I personally am.
Thank you so much.
We usually end the episode by asking the guest what he or she is watching, listening, reading, or digging in your case. Tell us what's keeping you occupied.
So I'm currently reading a set of essays by Amitav Ghosh. I read one last night about his visit to Andaman and Nicobar Islands just after the tsunami, which was extremely sad, actually. I felt really sad at the end of that. But I'm reading, it's called Dancing in Cambodia, another essay. So that's what I'm currently reading, alongside a book of profiles from the New Yorker, which is about some white people I don't actually know at all, but I just enjoy the writing style. So these are the two books I'm currently reading. I'm listening to a podcast called The Prince, which is by The Economist. It's on Xi Jinping, and it's super. It's by one of my friends, a journalist in The Economist. That's what I'm listening to. What else did you ask?
Watching.
Oh, I'm not actually watching anything but reruns of Friends. I think I'm not getting into any new.
Clearly, you're an archaeology person. Yeah.
I'm just not. Yeah, I'm not getting into any new Netflix show yet.
Yeah, makes sense when you're writing a book, I guess.
Not really. I don't know why. I'm just like I'm not in that space right now, but I've got a lot of recommendations which I need to look through, but nothing yet.
Wonderful. Sowmiya, thank you so much. This has been absolutely mind-blowingly exciting. I can't wait for the book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing this and putting so much of this in perspective for me and everyone. Thank you.
I hope it all helped clear some things, and I hope it wasn't technical. That's very bad feedback for a journalist.
It was entertaining. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm so glad for this opportunity. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik, that's Karthik with an H, on Twitter, and Filter_Koffee, that's coffee with a K, on Instagram.